Welcome back to the Optima Method, where we believe structure creates freedom and where clarity changes everything. Today's episode is a little more personal. It's about conversations, not just communication, but real conversations. The kind that challenge you, grow you, strengthens relationships, and ultimately shapes the way you lead both at home and in business. One thing I continually appreciate is the deep conversations I have with my husband. And as he continues to grow as a leader professionally, personally, it's been incredible to watch how our conversations have evolved too. What makes it really interesting is that we are very similar in many ways, but we also think very differently. And honestly, that's probably why it works. We often arrive at the same exact outcome, but through completely different thought processes, perspectives, and approaches. One of us may focus on structure first. The other one may focus on people first. One may think operationally, which is usually me. The other one a little bit more strategically, which is usually my husband. One may process things a little bit more quickly, while the other may need time to think through the layers. But the outcome is usually aligned. And that only happens because we talk through it, not defensively, not competitively, not trying to win, but openly. And that's what today's episode is all about. The importance of open dialogue, why honesty and clarity matters, why every voice deserves a seat at the table, and how transformational conversations can strengthen marriages, leadership teams, businesses, and families alike. Conversations truly create alignment. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that alignment means agreement, but it doesn't. Alignment means understanding. You can think differently and still move in the same direction. And I think this is where so many businesses, teams, and even relationships struggle. People avoid those difficult conversations because they assume differences create division. But differences are not the problem. Silence is. The lack of communication is. Assumptions are. The inability to create safe and honest dialogue is what creates the disconnect. Some of the best conversations my husband and I have are when we are challenging each other's thinking respectfully. And usually this is when we're having lunch together, away from everybody else, just the two of us with no distractions around. These are the moments where one of us sees risk the other didn't see or notice. There are moments where one of us slows the other one down. There are moments where one of us pushes bigger thinking while the other brings practicality into the conversation. And because we trust each other enough to communicate openly, we become stronger because of it. And if you know my husband, he's not a big talker either. But when it's about topics that applies directly to leadership, applies to growth, that's where you'll see him shine. Strong leaders do not surround themselves with people who always agree with them either. Strong leaders create environments where people feel comfortable contributing. Leadership is not about having all the answers either. As I continue to work with organizations, leadership teams, and operations, and a lot of different types of people, I notice something repeatedly. The healthiest teams are the ones where communications flow openly across every level. Titles don't matter. Not just top down, not just executive driven, but collaborative. Those are some of the strongest conversations because opinions matter. People's thoughts matter. Some of the best ideas in an organization may come from someone who isn't in leadership at all. And this is important because titles can unintentionally silence people. Sometimes people think my input probably doesn't matter. Nobody asked me. Leadership already made the decision, or it's just not my place. But operationally speaking, the people closest to the process often see the problems first. It's those frontline employees, the coordinator, the assistant, the team lead, the person actually executing the work every single day, or the people like project managers who are dealing with the escalations day in and day out. If organizations only value ideas from people with titles, they miss opportunities for innovation, improvement, and growth. Every idea should be welcomed. Not every idea will be implemented, but every person should feel heard. That distinction really matters. Personal conversations build strong foundations. One of those things I've realized in our marriage is that communication is not just about logistics. Yes, we have shared the calendar. Yes, we coordinate schedules, sports practices, meetings, work, travel, and family responsibilities. And trust me, with 3 boys, sports schedules, business ownership, leadership responsibilities, and everyday life, structure truly matters. But the most important conversations are not always about the schedule. They're about perspective, growth, stress, vision, frustration, goals, parenting, leadership, and just life. There are nights where we sit outside after the kids finally settle down and we just talk through everything. There are days where we sit and have lunch together and just talk through everything. Sometimes it's business. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's leadership challenges. Sometimes it's the future dreams and the projects that we want to build. Sometimes it's simply about processing life. Those conversations matter more than people realize because conversations build connection and connection builds trust. Without the trust, without the communication at that level, it just becomes service level. Without communication, assumptions grow, and assumptions quietly damage relationships over time. Now, there is an importance of honest dialogue. Honest dialogue requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially when it comes to leaders. Leaders often feel pressure to have all of the answers, stay composed, avoid uncertainty, protect authority. But authenticity is what builds credibility. People respect honesty far more than perfection. I've seen leaders lose teams because they stop communicating transparently. I've seen marriages struggle because people stop talking honestly. I've seen organizations become dysfunctional because feedback wasn't welcomed. Open dialogue creates clarity, and clarity removes confusion, and clarity builds that momentum that everybody needs. One of the most transformational things you can do as a leader, a spouse, a parent, or a business owner is simply creating that space for conversation. Not rushed, not reactive, but intentional. Now, there are different thinking styles, and those are strengths. One thing I appreciate about my husband is that while we often share the same goals, we process it differently. We're not the same person. And instead of seeing that as friction, we've learned to see it as a balance. That perspective shift matters. Different thinking styles strengthens teams. In business, this is critical, but it also applies. Some people are visionary thinkers. Some are a little bit more analytical. Some are operational. Some are relationship driven. Some are cautious. Some are aggressive in their decision making. But a healthy organization needs all of them. The danger happens when leaders only value people who think exactly like they do. That creates the blind spots. Growth happens when different perspectives are respected, and respect is built through conversation. Now, it is important to create environments where people feel safe to speak. Whether this is at home or at work, people need psychological safety to contribute honestly. If people fear embarrassment, dismissal, or defensiveness, they stop contributing. And once people emotionally disengage, organizations begin losing the innovation, the trust, the accountability. At home, this means listening without immediately trying to fix everything. Like one of my sons calls it the safe space, where no one's going to judge. Everyone is going to say what they feel and think without somebody else judging them. In leadership, this means welcoming feedback without being or becoming defensive. In meetings, this means allowing quieter voices space to contribute. And it's okay to ask them, what are your opinions? Calling people out to ask for their opinions because we all have those. Sometimes the greatest leadership skills is simply listening fully before responding. And it's hard to stay quiet. It's hard when you are someone who they always rely on to take a step back and letting somebody else speak. Not being prepared, but actually listening is important. So now there are 3 ways to improve conversation starting today. And I want to walk through those so you can implement them as well. The first one is to listen to understand and not to respond. Most people listen while mentally preparing their answer. For some people, it's going to take more time than others. Transformational conversations happen when people genuinely seek understanding first. Ask questions, pause, clarify, and process the answers. Understanding someone's perspective does not always mean you automatically need to agree with it, but it does create respect. Take that time to process the answers. The second one is creating the space for every voice. In meetings, family discussions, projects, and leadership conversations, intentionally invite input. Some people naturally speak quickly. Others need encouragement. The best leaders know how to create that balanced dialogue. Ask those people, what are your thoughts? What are we missing? How could we approach this? Do you see any risks, what we may have not considered yet? You may be surprised where the best ideas come from. Have those open and balanced dialogues. The third one is normalize honest conversations. Stop treating difficult conversations like conflict. Healthy communication includes feedback, accountability, different perspectives, clarification, growth conversations, the partnership. The goal is not to avoid those hard conversations. The goal is to navigate them respectively. And that's where trust is built. Now, here are my final thoughts on this topic. At the end of the day, some of the strongest relationships, healthiest teams, and most successful organizations are built on one thing: communication. Not the perfect communication, intentional communication. The conversations I continue having with my husband remind me constantly that growth happens when people are willing to communicate openly, challenge each other respectively, and remain aligned through honest and clarity. And whether you are leading a household, a business, a team, or simply trying to improve your own relationships, remember this: people want to feel heard. People want clarity. People want that connection. And often, honest conversation can truly change everything. Now, thank you for joining me for another episode of the Optima Method. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who values leadership, someone who values growth, communication, and building stronger relationships, both personally and professionally. Subscribe to the podcast, follow me on Instagram, and remember, structure creates freedom. Clarity creates alignment, but conversations create that connection. Until next time, keep optimizing, keep leading, keep building with intention.